All right, everybody, how are we doing? Um, just doing a sound check. 1 2 1 2 3 4. Looks like there's cat hair on the mic. How's everybody doing? Guess I can rock these shades because I wear my sunglasses at night so I can. Okay, we'll wait for folks to filter on in as if you were a hang off the back filter. What I need though is my tripod, which I believe is in my truck. I have 3 other tripods, but they're all holding other things right now. So let me grab that really quick, and I promise I'll be right back. Of course, I'm always forgetting one element of streaming every time. But let me grab that real quick. And today we're going to be talking about dun, 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 the history of keeping fish. And essentially, we'll talk about some of our ideas on when is a fish a pet, when is a fish domesticated, can you domesticate a fish? And I think we need to redefine some of these terms that currently, by anthropological terms, historical terms, there's no such thing as a domesticated fish, period. They're just not mammals that can be, or they're not an animal that can be domesticated like mammals or birds can be in the rest of the world. However, I have a bone to pick with that. I don't think that that is correct, and I have some pretty strict definitions that I want to toss out there and see what you guys think about that. And then also, I'll be talking off the cuff. This isn't going to be a deep dive in the sense that I'm going in on all the history of everything that's been kept around the world, but we are going to take a journey around the world as far as we're going to look at the Mayans, the South American cultures in the Nazca culture and the Andean culture, as well as maybe some of the mound building cultures, the Coast Salish tribes of North America, the Chinese, the Japanese, Babylonian, the Fertile Crescent, and Mesopotamia, the Middle East. And we'll also be taking a look at, when these things got to Europe, just as kind of an overview of the topic. But if you have any questions, just as always, feel free to ask. And also, if the quality of the stream starts to go down, please let me know because I have it in HD, but it's a matter of the internet connection here having trouble, and we'll go to totally wireless and just use my data plan, which is okay resolution usually, if it starts failing here for any reason. But let me grab that tripod really quick. It's about 40 feet away from me, and then we will jump right in. Stare at the ceiling for a moment, please. Your biggest fan, guys. Everybody wants to rule the world. There's a room where the light won't find you, holding hands while the walls come tumbling down. All right, guys, how is it going? Mr. Gromby, G-Bear, what is up? Natural Aquarius, 3G, Starhawk, Shayla Jones, Lumpy Dog. Hey, what's up, Lumpy Dog? How many gallons of fish per kilowatt on filter capacity at noon when feeding frozen food? I need to know. The question, that's not the microphone. The question is one that has baffled people for millennia and will continue to baffle people for millennia. All right. Whoa, we've got a slight, that's weird. Stay up. All right, there we go. That should stay up. Mr. Grumpy, bum 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 bum, sing me a dream. Who domesticated the first shrimps? Well, okay, so let's get into the first controversy of many that we'll be speaking on today, and that is what is domestication? So, Carolyn, hello, welcome. So that's our first hurdle. What is domestication? And if you go by historical, I guess traditional, I don't know who came up with it. Honestly, I tried to find out who came up with this, but they basically, biologists and ethnobotanists and are archaeologists, anthropologists, basically came together and they said there are, I think, 11 animals which are domesticated. And according to their lists, they are, get ready, the guinea pig, the camel, the llama or alpaca, or they have there's another one too with in that group. The starts with a Y. It's a cute, adorable little creature. And then a dog, a turkey, a chicken, and that's it for the New World, essentially, other than pigs. So then we have pigs or boar. And there's some argument over when they came to the New World, because some people believe that the pigs and boars, that we've got a native population that was brought over with like early, even earlier than the Mayans and things like that. And others believe that it was brought over on canoes or boats by Polynesian or explorers, 8,000 years ago. I mean, if you go back 10,000 years ago, which at first we thought, oh, there weren't even people in North and South America then. Well, now we've got two archaeological sites that we're pretty certain of that are 14,500 years old. That's before the land bridge opened up. And so one is in South America, one is in the United States, southern United States, often off the coast on an island. And then there's another one off California on another island out by Calidisi that is debatable whether that date is accurate. But the argument in books, a book that made a big splash when it was new was called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. And I'll take this time also to say, if you don't have Audible and you want to try it out, just books on tape, nobody has tape anymore, books on cassette. If you want to have books that are digitally audio files that you can listen to, I have a link in the description, and just for trying it out for free, you guys help the channel out. It gives me $3. It doesn't cost you anything. If you decide to keep it and pay the $10 a month, $8.99 or $9.99, it varies what the deal is, then I get $10 for the channel. But I get $3 just for you trying it, and then just cancel it after 30 days. But if you do it and you decide to do it, I'd try out either Dragon Behind the Glass, which is about arowanas and the seedy world of fish trading and stuff like that. But I would go over, I would probably go over, if you like this episode today, I would do Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, which was a great book. And it basically, the whole thesis of the book was, why did North America and South America, why were the Americas lagging behind technologically? And that's even debatable, because yeah, they're lagging behind for a time, but now that we're entering the 21st century and the environment is getting decimated, who's to say that if no one had ever come and brought the new technology to the new world that was in the old world, who's to say that they wouldn't be way better off if the whole world, if it was still a hunting and gathering and horticultural society. So, there's a myth also that even is still kind of perpetuated in Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is now a 20-year-old book. But that book kind of said that the reason that they didn't have as advanced of technology was because they didn't have any beasts of burden. That was their that's the hypothesis. And then also, obviously, there's the disease thing later on, and there's a whole reason why Europeans came in and were able to cause a lot of havoc. However, now we're also finding that, wait a minute, there are 2 tribes in South America confirmed to have DNA from Polynesian tribes. So they made it from there, and there's one that they found Asian DNA. Now we also know that the Aborigines and the Polynesians and Micronesians were likely there somewhere between 40 and 60,000 years ago. We're in Australia, and we're in the islands off the coast. There was land bridges off and on that were the Torres Strait, is that what it is? I think so. Was probably less than 80 miles. I've seen as low as 42, but it could mean that basically you would see birds and things from this shore. You could see birds, you could see cloud formations that only happen over land, and ancient people could read that. I mean, there are Polynesian cultures that were able to look at the waves, and they could read patterns of, there's a low pressure front 400 miles to the north, there's a storm 1,000 miles to the south, and there's 2 islands that are about 20 miles long and 10 miles long to the west. I mean, it's incredible. They used to do these things, and if you guys haven't ever seen them, look up stick maps. They used to weave sticks together, and it would help them navigate both the stars and the waves. And it was a 3D map to help them look at waves and things, as well as it had knots depending on the culture. And it's just so 3D, whereas our language, our written language, is a 2D, a 2-dimensional, or even really 1-dimensional thing. It's just written down. We see it, we read the cue, and ta-da. Well, their language and writing, you could say, is primitive, but on the other hand, who's to say that that technology isn't way more sophisticated, in that these seafaring cultures actually were able to build a 3D world representing map out of sticks and lashings. So they're really cool. The Bishop Museum online in Hawaii has some of those maps, and also some of the outrigger canoes and things like that they traveled in. But basically, long story short, is we're realizing now that people were much more tied to the water and to the life on a boat, life on the coast, more than we even thought. So it could be, I mean, we could find out, because things just don't last that long. I mean, we could find out that 50, 60, 70, 80, maybe even 100,000 years ago, there were people in Asia. And by people, I mean everything from Neanderthals to Denisovans and the Frodo man, or as he's sometimes called, the Formosa man, or there's also, what's the other one called? The Hobbit. So there's a few kind of tongue-in-cheek names for them that you may have read in articles by National Geographic or something. But basically, there were a lot of human-like species living in Asia, living in, I mean, if you count the Neanderthals, living in Europe and the Middle East, and cohabitating with us, with our species specifically. So now when you talk about archaeology, anthropology, they actually they kind of are blurring it because they're finding that, like, for instance, it's likely that Neanderthal were able to start fire with flint before humans, yet humans had fire hearths, so they would like carry a torch with already lit fire. But they found actual striking rods and rocks, not a rod, but it's a rock, and like a kit with like down and but like tinder material in burial sites and things like that. Homo florensis is another one. There are, I don't know, what are there, 108 of them last I heard or something like that, that in the last 500,000 years. Uh, but it appears that the Denisovans and the Neanderthals are for sure related to some humans today. And then there may be others. We don't know if the little hobbit species is had a distant shared relative or not. But in any case, the point is that way early on is we had the ability to get to islands. We had the ability to fish and to catch things out of the water, whether that was turtles in freshwater and salmon and things like that in colder regions, or whether that was tropical fish or dolphins or seals, whatever. They were clearly a large part of our diet. And the interesting thing about seafood, sea life, is that there's no other ecosystem really that can supply what a human needs like the ocean. There is the ability of the Inuits and the Yupik people to eat 95% whale meat and seal meat and survive and be healthy for that matter. So there's that, and then you've got in India in the Ganges, off the Ganges River in the Indus River Valley, you've got people that are also living a vegan existence early on, like 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. So you've got all meat, all vegan, and everything in between. But the thing is that you need to be on the coastal waters, or perhaps you could do it on a river. But if you're going to be eating that much meat and stuff, you need to eat the organs, the blubber with the oil and the vitamins in it and all that stuff. And that's where the Inuit and the Yupik, the Arctic people, are able to get that from. But they're the Arctic people for a long time were thought to be probably the only people that didn't really practice any form of indigenous aquaculture, that were on the water. And now they've found, in the last 10 years, they've found sites in Finland, Norway, and off of what's that city? Vladivostok, north of Vladivostok, Russia, far eastern Russia, almost western Russia, almost where it comes back around to Alaska. But north of there, they've found implements including hooks, and because of rocks that have holes drilled right in the center, which is pretty difficult to do. It's a very time-consuming task to do that. And then also, south of there, just to talk about what we do know for a fact, when people were fishing, now that's different than keeping pet fish, obviously, but people were fishing and corralling fish and moving them from place to place alive 30,000 years ago is a good guess. And how do we know that? Why do we guess that? Well, we do a little bit of ethnobotany and a little bit of applied cultural anthropology, which was what I got my first major in. And as many jokes as there are about that practice and how useless or silly that major can be unless you're teaching it or going to live with the tribe, it has taught us some really interesting things. For instance, how many days people tend to spend getting physical activity in indigenous cultures, like in tribal cultures or agrarian cultures versus industrialized cultures. How many calories your average human needs. So there's a lot of things that we've been able to observe and then kind of apply to ourselves, even if that's, you know, not always directly applicable. It's something that's interesting, that shows us our limits or our end variables, our bookends. And so in the story of figuring out who first kept fish as pets, we have to decide, you know, when you're on a farm and you're a kid, for instance, if you have 1,000 goats and you have, say, it's just a story that reminded my grandmother. So they had dozens of goats. They didn't have thousands, but they had dozens of goats and chickens. And my grandmother had a chicken that was her favorite. And Walter was her favorite chicken. And she wanted to keep Walter when she was like 7 years old. Now, she grew up in the 19 teens and 20s in Texas, Louisiana border, and like right up in the corner by Arkansas, or by Nebraska, or Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas, by Texarkana. And the Dust Bowl issues hit them. So farming was having a heck of a time. And she basically would do all her chores. She knew that the chickens got eaten and everything, but she had a chicken that she loved. And so her mom let her keep it for a year. Well, the year got desperate and she had to, her dad made her kill her chicken. And he thought it would be kind to make her or let her kill her own chicken rather than him doing it because, I don't know, some control thing? Who knows? Building character, the 1920s, yay. But my grandma always thought of that chicken as a pet. And that was a pet that, like, its death traumatized her. So I have my reservations about when do we start calling things pets? I mean, we know pharaohs and things kept lions and tigers and hippos and things in enclosures. I mean, what level of interaction do you have to have with a creature before it's a pet? I mean, we still keep fish that are not friendly. If you have a school of piranhas, I mean, you know, that's not a pet that you're going to want to play with or anything. And so I'm still torn on where we say pet or domesticated fish go. So for me, it can't be emotions because that's too easy. You can love a wild animal as much as you'd love a pet. That's pretty clear. But to me, what domesticated means is that it's either been altered by humans for a purpose of consumption, whether that is to use it as hides, or maybe you want all black cows so that you can get black leather. So you've taken all the black cows and bred them together. To me, that is domestication or a pet. Whatever you want to call it, domestication. But I think that is a fuzzy line, and this, then people say, well, then everything is open for domestication, basically. Like humans have tinkered with all sorts of things. But to me, I don't see why that's a problem to classify more things than less things. To me, it seems silly to classify a guinea pig and a llama and an elephant. Oh yeah, we didn't finish listing them. So in the New World, it was guinea pig, alpacas, or llamas, and the other one that starts with a Y. And then there was yukunis, is that what they're called? And then chickens, turkeys, and there's also a dog. So the interesting thing about the dog domesticated in North America, South America, was that there was a dog that was not wolf derived. It was actually derived from a different species of dog that was a wild dog in North America, Central America, and Chihuahuas and Peruvian dogs, singing dogs. Some of those dogs, when contact happened, they were already here. Now, there's some thought that perhaps those dogs could have also even come from Polynesian shipwrecks and things like that. But what we know now is that almost none survived. Their genetics were not rugged enough, or not, I don't know what the word is. They weren't able to compete with the genetic uh, no, man, why my words are, sorry guys, my words are having a hard time. The dominant gene. I'm trying to think of the word for multiple dominant, but so in any case, they had a hard time being the dominant species. And so the Mexican hairless dog, the Chihuahua, these dogs, even though we still have the breeds now, they were bred in with European dogs post contact, and now that non-wolf DNA is seemingly missing from almost all the dogs sampled. There are a few dogs in Argentina and a few in the Arctic that still had that non-wolf canine domesticated. And this is like really new info. They go over it on a recent Channel 9 documentary. And then there's also I want to say SciShow, and I'll try to add the links later if I can find that. But in any case, so these dogs, nobody argues that they're domesticated because they have a function. But to me, a function, they service humans. I don't know if that's needed in my mind for domestication. Like, how does a guinea pig really service humans? It's edible. I mean, so are fish technically. So the other thing that has to happen to have pets is kind of, you either need to be such a primitive society that you have free time and that you have the ability to sit around and, some people are hunting and gathering, some people are preparing food, some people are making clothing. They find that in the tropics, your average tribe, this was a study done in the 1950s, and I wish I could recall the anthropologist who did it because it was really groundbreaking, found that your average tribe spent about 16 hours a week working. That's it. The rest of their time was free time, sitting around the fire, taking shifts, sleeping, doing whatever, but hunting, gathering firewood, nursing babies, like that kind of, like things that are arduous were only about 16 hours of the time. And they thought, industrial revolution, humans are so smart and we invent tools for everything and make our lives more efficient. And they found that actually humans for the last million years, we didn't work 30 to 60-hour weeks. That's not what we evolved doing. There's a reason why you have to learn that work ethic, and why so many indigenous cultures, when they made contact with a European or Asian culture or a Northern African culture that had the pre-industrial, Renaissance or medieval, even all the way through Roman, Carthaginian, but this idea of making goods and services that are above what you need for buying and selling, that's when we get to the next step of evolution. Because if you're just subsisting on a farm, you may not have time to paint a picture and to have a dog and go play fetch with the dog and do that kind of stuff. But if you're a nomadic hunting and semi-nomadic hunting and gathering group, you may have time. We see in the Amazon a lot of times, or also in Southeast Asia, people will have like monkeys that they'll have tied on like little leashes, and the like children a lot of times will keep like a little spider monkey or something, or a capuchin monkey on their shoulder and play with it. Why? Because it's cute. I don't know why. Because it's funny, because it's entertaining. Humans like animals, and to me, that's a pet, but it's not domesticated. So that's where we start to get into another definition that's fuzzy. So with fish, if you've been breeding it to select for color or attributes like fatter fish, or a fish that can live in saltier water, or a fish that will produce more vitamin D, who knows, whatever. I'm just trying to think of things here. That would be domestication in my mind. However, the pet thing I see as separate. But I'm curious what your thoughts are, because in the old world, the other traditionally domesticated animals include the dog from the wolf, the cat from Felis sylvestris, I believe it is, and then they include the other camel, the back train camel, as well as the dromedary camel, one hump and two hump, and what else is there? The peacock, arguably, and peahen, they say could be. And then the elephant is another one. And I feel like, sheep and goats, pigs, and quail, I want to say, were included for some reason or another. But to me, I don't know. Does that, like, why are those the animal? Yes, the donkey also, which would be, the ass, or the and then that includes like a burro, a mule. Yeah, there's some variations of those things too. But when you start breeding things, and obviously the horse too. When you start, and cows, duh. So when you start breeding these creatures for milk rather than meat, for instance, that's when I think like you're domesticating the cow, you're changing it. And if that's the criteria, then we have to say, well, what if it's involuntarily? Yeah, exactly. So dragon layer, jungle fowl were domesticated in Southeast Asia. So that's kind of where we get into like, well, where's the chicken from? Where peacock or peahens or quail, like pheasants, those kind of birds. Somewhere there's some probably shared ancestor of chickens that likely came from that region originally. So yeah. But moving on to fish. So who were the first people to keep fish that weren't just catching them to eat them, that we have evidence of? Well, we have ponds, and we have massive ponds, and we know that all around the Mediterranean by about 6,000 BC, or sorry, 6,000 years ago, 4,000 BC, it was commonplace from the Spanish coast, the French coast, the Greek, the island of Cyprus, Corsica, Italy, obviously, and outside of Rome. But they had these pens, and not only so, some thought of it that I was reading recently is that, and by the way, have we talked about this before? Yes. Will we talk about it again? Yes. This whole channel is based on this kind of where has the hobby started? Where have human and fish interactions begun? Why are things the way they are categorized and things like that? And new information is coming out all the time, and we're living in a really cool time to be learning about this stuff, especially with being able to extract DNA and being able to date things more accurately. Whereas before, sometimes we could be off by 1,000 years, give or take, and that is not so helpful. Dr. Pepper's right here. But in any case, so we know that also early on in human history, the other really important asset that people went crazy for, went out of their way for, was salt. I mean, amongst other things, but salt was a really important one. You die without salt. You need electrolytes, you need salt, you need potassium, you need iodine, yada, yada. So the Romans, the Etruscans, even early on, like the Phoenicians and ancient Egyptians in the early dynasties, things like that, they have these salt bins, and they're basically rock walls, or sometimes they would actually, the Egyptians actually came up with a way to make a cement that would set underwater. And this cement was based on a limestone mortar, and it was an alkaline kind of thing, but they were able to set it. And the Romans then improved upon it by adding aggregate to it. But we know that off the coast of like Alexandria, even into the ocean, it's not just carved stone slabs, but there's actual still concrete that has lasted this long, that is an amalgam of powdered limestone and various other things that they put together. And there's several recipes that were guarded. I mean, like to the point of they would burn down their recipe for it in the library if invaders were coming. It was a game changer for them to be able to put deep water ports and sink both the ability for them to put what do you call them, piles, a pile driver, for them to put those out on, like to make a dock for a port, for a deeper water port, as well as the ability of navigating shallow rivers. So for instance, the style of ship you see with the Viking invasions and things, that's really similar to the Egyptian ships. If you look at the early Egyptian ships, they're very wide with a very shallow displacement of water. They don't have deep holes, they don't have, they're not as stable that way, but they are able to carry a lot of stuff, and they displace less deeply, and so they can go down rivers, they can be in shallower ports, things like that. Well, this whole world was connected basically. So before the Middle Ages, the Mediterranean was essentially a highway. It was a highway that connected Africa and the Near East and the Middle East and Europe, and they saw it as such. I mean, they saw it as, oh, it's just a couple days to get across to Africa, if they're in, say, France, or, if they want to go to Tunisia or Morocco or wherever, in Spain or something. So this trade was really flourishing, and because of that, they're able to stay in one spot. And people with salt could come and trade them salt for fish. In Lebanon, they had cedar trees, and they could build their big, massive ships from the wood in the Lebanese and Jordanian forests. So both places had, and for that matter, Israel too, used to have forests, and they would build ships so they could get the lumber from there. So they were able to just be the shipbuilding people. Well, with all this going on and staying put, people kind of wanted to try new things. They got sick of the same things day in and day out. And especially as you develop a wealthy class or ruling class, pharaohs or emperors, depends on the era. But it holds true for all of it, all the way up until the Middle Ages, when things kind of fall apart for a while. And they didn't is in the Muslim world, honestly. The Middle Ages or the Dark Ages didn't really exist in India and Iran and Baghdad and all of the Horn of Africa, into Mali and down into Zanzibar and Zimbabwe, and kind of the whole belt across Africa, where it goes to sub-Saharan, all the way from Cote d'Ivoire and things. You've got a flourishing and a lot of gold and things being found, but Europe hits hard times. So sorry, Europe. But before all that, the Mediterranean was, every culture on the Mediterranean was able to basically have an excess of time in their ruling class, or they were able to then specialize. So once you get a culture that is built up that much, they're then able to specialize. So once they have enough food to feed everyone 2 times over because of trade, then they can focus on, okay, let's make sheep that are all black, so we can, or all white, for instance, so then we can dye the hides the color of our religious classes' robes, whatever, So the the options of what to do and the inventions and innovations that usually only war sparks before that are suddenly sparked during peacetime. And one of the things, that was huge, and I can't get over it. When you read about it, you're like, that can't be right. That can't be right. But garum, which was like this vinegary, ketchupy, fish saucy stuff, that it didn't have tomatoes in it. That's a New World thing. But it had like a vinegar. It was like fish heads and herring and oysters oftentimes, and then salt and seaweed. And it just was this really, robotic audio. Let's see what's going on. All right. Hopefully, I just turned off the Wi-Fi, so hopefully you guys can see me better now. I'm so mad at Comcast about this Wi-Fi thing. I've been going back and forth with them like crazy. But in any case, so then they have this garum stuff a fermented fish sauce that was very popular 3,000 to 2,000 years ago, especially. But the kinds of fish that they wanted to serve it with, it became kind of this one-upsmanship. So do we consider the fact that kings in England wanted to eat live fish that were fresh, for instance, from, say, the Nile perch or something, or gar, or whatever, who knows what it was they wanted to eat, catfish. You see the lists of ingredients on some of these kings, pharaohs. I mean, even really early, like in the Pharaoh days or in the Assyrian days, when we're talking like 4,000 BC, almost 6,000 years ago, Hammurabi's time, like in Babylon, the Hanging Gardens and the Ancient Wonders of the World. There is, I mean, it's incredible to read the list of stuff that they had access to. Even way, way back when writing is first happening, when it's like pictographic, you can already see them documenting, like, this king was so rich that he had an elephant and he had a tiger and he had sea bass, even though they're inland or whatever, And so they came up with ways to keep these fish alive. They came up with wagons and carts that would keep them alive. They came up with fountains in Rome. I mean, they figured that out really early on in Rome, how to keep the fish alive. Now, skipping back to the other side of the world, I'm going to make kind of a bold statement and say that I think any culture that came up with freshwater irrigation, which why would you have saltwater irrigation other than to harvest salt? Anybody who came up with that, I think they were keeping fish as well. It's a waste of resources not to. So whether that is in a rice paddy or that is Hawaiians that were using like making taro root, like they'd have a plantation of taro and be making poi and stuff, and they'd have these big ponds where they would keep saltwater fish alive and where they would let them lay eggs even sometimes. And the fish ponds on Hawaii, those are only about 1,000 years old only. But you can bet that if they were doing that pre-contact with any Europeans or anything, you can bet that other Polynesians had that figured out. I mean, it was no small chore. they literally carved away volcanic slabs, like boulders. Like there'd be a big boulder 100 feet tall, and they just cut it in half at 50-foot mark and then make a bathtub out of it. Very, very hard to do. Yeah, actually, Son of Quack, that's an interesting point. Poi and taro, I do think there's something about that where if you put it in the water, it causes the fish to come to like float to the top, like stunned. But maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like you're right. I think you may be right. If anybody knows about that, let me know. Is it even possible to have bodies of water without fish? Birds go there with eggs, and on them accidentally, boom, you've got fish. Yeah, that's really that's the bottom line. Is nature finds a way, and shortly after nature finds a way, and humans find a way to contain it, and say, you know what, these fish leave half the year. Why don't we just block their escape route so that we can have them all year? That's a really short leap that usually it takes for humans to decide to do that. So it's interesting in that sense. I don't know. It's interesting to me that somewhere along the lines, when do people then look at them and say, well, this is a food source, but I also want to select, maybe there's one gold one. And maybe, maybe it's a thing like the father, in American households, how it used to kind of be a thing where like the dad gets the drumstick, or, some prized cut of meat. Or in a lot of tribal societies, if you kill the animal, you get the organ meat. If you went on the hunt, you get the organ meat. If you're a pregnant woman back home, you get the organ meat. Well, then there also become all sorts of talisman things in culture. So say you're eating bass all the time. So you're eating bass, eating bass, eating bass. All of a sudden, instead of your normal looking bass, there's a bright blue one. Well, if there is any taboo or any ceremony associated with that, like only the men of the household get to eat the bass or whatever, then all of a sudden you've put a premium on that one bass that's different. And very quickly you see, like with carp, because we know that carp were kept for probably 3,000 years in China and Asia. And it took probably 1,000 years before golden carp developed, like full on golden. And it was a death sentence if you took a golden carp out of the water, out of the king's water, or even if it was wild and there happened to be another one, that was a death sentence. There's someone in my house. Yes, there's a wife in my house. She just got home. Interesting. Crazy Muncher says, because taro is toxic raw to humans because of calcium oxalate. I don't know anything about it, but I am fascinated now because I remembered something about it. Do you have to process it to make it harmful to fish? Because that's another thing. So another, like in the Amazon, for instance, the tribe people would take different plants that would stun the fish, and they would make all sorts of concoctions, put it in the water, poison the fish, or stun the fish ideally, and then they come to the top. There's a vine, and I'm trying to remember what the vine is called, but it actually causes it so that the fish can't get oxygen. It depletes the oxygen from like their ability of their gills to get oxygen. So all the fish that can breathe air are up at the top going, and all the ones who can't are flipped over dead in a pond. And they would use that and, scoop them up, eat them. And as we'll find out, because tomorrow Ivan Mycology is coming on the show, which I'm so excited for. We're having a special show just because Ivan's coming on. He's got 20 years of video and photos of the Orinoco River Delta and fish in the wild, in their natural habitats, watching the things that they do and all of that. And stories about indigenous people there and fish that were thought to be extinct, fish that nobody knew existed, fish that he's discovered. And then we'll have an open question and answer time at the end. And it'll be right around this time tomorrow. We'll be starting at basically a half an hour ago from this time. So in my time, that's 4:30 p.m. East Coast, that'll be 7:30 p.m. And I think we'll probably do about an hour to an hour and a half episode and talk with Ivan Mikolji. But it's just interesting to me that there's these lucky things with hunts and with when they start keeping animals. So we know, for instance, that the Native Americans in where I live here in Washington State, that out in the San Juans, when the salmon would come and spawn, there's salmon that come every 2 years. And for those ones, they would come in to these coves in this river or in this island chain up in the San Juans, and they had to kind of pass through this narrow point. And so the natives would basically put fishing traps there, big nets that are like half a mile long, a big net to tie back then. And they would have more fish than they could process in the months of summer. I mean, it would go bad before they could figure out what to do with it. People think that Native Americans and the indigenous groups were always like, peace, man, live one with nature, like take only what you need, and didn't have a concept of ownership or whatever. It's just not true. People are people. Access to resources is worth dying over in most places, and Native Americans were no exceptions. There are some odd exceptions where they didn't believe in like personal property and things like that. But access to hunting grounds, that is something that was like your band or your tribe had access to, and you were then given the right to trade for that. And if those terms were changing, there would be war. And fish have been a reason for war many times in the oral tradition of the Coast Salish people. Same with, Scandinavians, access to fishing grounds and things like that, or seals, or later on whales, which that's for profit. That's not even subsistence food. That's later on industrial revolution, whale oil being worth money and people fighting over that kind of stuff. So the crazy part about how many fish were here is there were so many fish in Washington State that they think that the density could have approached that of Mesopotamia. And we are temperate climate. But there were just so many salmon in so many rivers. They think it could have been between Vancouver, BC, and Portland. They think there could have been 3-4 million people held here comfortably with the resources, which is insane. That's like only a little less than we have now. Like now we have 6 million people in that range, basically. So, but disease wiped them out before we knew how many people there were. We do know that there were dozens and dozens of longhouses and holding pens for fish. Now, the other thing that they did was they would, this is more of a European thing, but it's been found in Mayan culture, in the Nazca culture on the coast away from the desert. But they would build pens on the flats of sand with just stones or whatever they had, at their hand. Oyster shells, didn't matter. But they would build these pens that would hold water, and then they'd put mud or whatever and sun bake it on there. So they'd build these walls, and usually they're big square containers, and they'd have like a sluice gate that you could lift a board or open a thing to, and then all the water would come out, or you could flood in with more water. Well, what the Egyptians did and this is just another aside that I find interesting, is they would have herring and brim and mullet type fish living in these ponds, and they would just let them eat any of the mussels or clams that were found in the substrate there, and algae that would grow from the sun, and then any sort of plankton that would grow eating the algae. and they would actually they had whole books on, like, scrolls dictating on how much water to add if it got as red as the breast of the ibis in, the ibis's um, feathers, for instance, of the male. Like, there's just different, I don't know, I'm making something up right there, clearly, but, like, it would say, like, if it's blood red algae, do this, let more water in. If it's a green or bluish color, if it's the color of the sky, then let some evaporate off, don't add more water, or throw fish heads in there. And it all was different things like nitrate, or iron, or salt. They were playing with these variables, and it's just, it's really crazy to me, how that went on, and how then what they would do is they would get the evaporated salts on the edge of the pond off, and they would eat that as or sell it, scrape it off. You'd have salt crystals. Well, if you do this enough out in the mudflats of an intertidal region, this is actually called, what do they called it? I don't want to get it wrong. It's aquaculture soil reclamation, saline soil reclamation via aquaculture. And there's a paper that came out in 1981, the University of Cairo, that's available online. You can still Google it. And they talk about how they kept these fish there, and they were able to feed the fish. They fed them their old food scraps. They fed them waste. They fed them like husks of corn, or not corn, that wasn't in, but husks of old leftover farm agricultural byproducts. And after 2 or 3 years of this, they would drain, every year they would drain the pond, and just allow only the minnows or the eggs to be left in the pond in these deep pockets that they would dig just for spawning. And then they would take a eucalyptus tree, a little sprout, and they would put that as deep as your finger goes, like very specific texts, into the center of where you had the area that's like the size of a football pitch, or about the size of a football pitch, in length, but in length and width, like a big square. And then it had the fence around it already, made out of rocks that's, say, 5 feet tall or something, 4 feet tall. And then after several years, that salt has actually come out of the ground, and you can reclaim that ground. And the year when the eucalyptus starts to grow, then you go and you plant mangroves, or eucalyptus, or there's like a list of 4 other plants. And then 4 years after that, you can then plant normal crops like vegetables. So there's things like that that just blow my mind. And it's like, that's 4,000 years ago. Like, how many times did they mess that up before they got it right? And then this sort of technology then spreads around like wildfire. If you could tell someone in a society that they have to trade for salt, like all their excess labor and time goes into metalworking that they have to trade for salt because they can't get it locally. If you can teach them how to extract salt locally, boom, game changer. Same with fish. And so to answer the question of all this, I've really beat around the bush in that all around the world for 10,000 years, people have been working with fish. And I have to assume that in all of these cultures, people found fish that looked unique or that were special, and they probably kept them. I also would assume by things like in Egypt, the Mormarid paper that I talked about, we found that the Mormarids, or elephant nose fish, baby whales, whatever you want to call them, the cool Mormarid fish, they weren't present in any of the refuse dumps anywhere on the grounds of the Sphinx or the pyramids. Now, all the other fish that were native to that river, to the Nile, were everywhere. I mean, they could find the bones of all different size fish, puffer fish, catfish, you know, whatever it was they were looking for. There were plenty of those scraps and chicken bones and pepper and, you know, different, all sorts of different plants and animals that were left over in the waste trenches that were then covered up and then left under the hot desert sun and compacted into these bricks of detritus, basically. They'd be called shelled middens if they were on the coast and like full of trash, but they're really like middens of midden, midden. It's like a collection of junk. It's an ancient trash heap next to the fire, kind of the thing you wing over your shoulder. But they didn't find any mormyrids in it, so they thought, well, there aren't any mormyrids in the river back then. Well, turns out that in the caves of several pharaohs in the sarcophagus, or not the sarcophagus, but in the mausoleum or the tomb, there were mormyrids. So, oh, well, then they see that the alphabet, mormyrids are one of the main letters. So one of the sounds that you make out of the 22 sounds you make in Egyptian or whatever it is, one of those 22, it was so important that they made it after the sound of the word for the mormyrid, you know, the same, like if we said pleco, a picture of a pleco in our made up language here would then be pluck, maybe, you know? So mormyrid in their culture was like a pictographic, but it was late Egyptian by this point. So it wasn't, it was a phonetic iconography rather than pure hieroglyphics, late dynasty. So then they see, though, that the mormyrids of a certain size were being, hey, Cassie B, good to see you. Too Cooley for Schooly, good to see you. Steven, good to see you. Good to see everyone rolling in. But so then this was all recent, but they found that those fish were mummified, that they were preserved, and that they were of a certain size when it was done. Like none were super big, none were super small. And to me, that would indicate that they specifically separated them and kept them maybe in a pond that was on its own rather than those desalination ponds, or rather than, you know, for instance, all throughout Southeast Asia and India, they'd have rice ponds. Even in the Caribbean and Central North America, or Central America, I guess you'd call it, where you have grains that grow like tubers or lotus blossoms or cranberries, you know, things that grow in bogs or in essentially rice paddy-like conditions. They would terrace those things off all around the world, and fish were a big part of that. I mean, fish ate the nuisance pests a lot of times, and fish were just another source of protein. So things like paradise fish, snakeheads, half-beaks, bettas, carp, those are all probably first encountered in these fields that were only allowed to occur because they'd built up enough wealth in their society that now they had free time, and now they had classes that were demanding things. So now your peasant is out there in the field working on a rice paddy, and they see that there's one of these carps that they know the upper class people like, but it has a unique marking. So they have all the incentive now to start taking that and trying to figure out how to make more of them. So to me, that would be a really logical way of how, you know, koi and goldfish came to be. But who knows how many fish species we've lost from other cultures that had significance, or maybe they just weren't pretty. Maybe they were bred to be fat, you know, just like a veal or something, where we breed, or foie gras, or, you know, something like that, where we feed animals a diet that makes them taste really good, but it gives them a really crappy life or something. Who knows if there were fish that they were feeding, you know, something that was really good tasting, like honey and oats or something. Who knows? And that made them taste good. And so over time, they needed fish that could survive eating just honey and oats or whatever, or they needed fish that would be bigger. So to me, that is domestication. I think. Misfits, Reptiles, and Aquatics, thank you so much. Got the first super chat of the night. Always appreciate it. You are always such a generous contributor, and I really appreciate that. Are you able to elaborate more on the specific ways ancient Romans kept saltwater ponds and whatnot in their time? Yeah, so there's some controversy over this because the Romans were really good at taking things from other cultures. So the Carthaginians and Hannibal and that whole chapter of the Punic Wars, Punic Wars. After that period, they took over a lot of the North African cultural traditions, which is where the Carthaginians probably got it from the Egyptians, and also the Israelis or the Canaanites probably got it from them, the Assyrians. So depending on the time, that salt extraction was a really big thing. So they had these big salt. They're still there, actually. They have a name. I'm probably wrong, but for some reason, solarium wants to come to mind. And I not like solarium like that, but like spelled differently for some reason, like salinity. But I'll have to look it up. But funny jokes, Crazy Muncher. That is a reference to Hannibal taking his elephants across the Alps, which he killed like, I don't know, 150 of them. But damn it, 2 of them, or whatever, 15 of them made it, and 2 of them made it through the end of battle. And that would have been one hell of a scary thing to see, knowing even if that many died. It's even scarier to know that that many died, and that the guy still brought the food and the ability to get them through these narrow trails and things. Crazy history. Fascinating history. But the Romans, the other thing the Romans loved was sea bass. And the Romans kept both Wells catfish and striped sea bass. Now, there's a holiday that's now associated with Christmas time that would have been considered a pagan holiday around the winter solstice. And there are a ton of images for over 1,000 years in both late Greek period and then all through the Roman period of people keeping, having basically a coffin or sarcophagus looking thing underneath their bed, and they'd have slats over that, and it would be filled with water in the pictures, and they would have live bass in there, or carp. Carp is what the poorest people would have. Roman citizens would have bass or catfish, depending on which one they liked. So, interestingly, for some reason, historians don't think that they actually kept those fish under their beds. They think that that was almost like an ice chest. But there are pictures that show it also in times where there's like a whole scene and it's summer. It's not just during this religious time. So it may have been kind of like a refrigerator, or kind of like we keep lobsters now when we're getting ready to serve them, where we want to keep them fresh. But we don't know for sure. But that's been a big mystery that we don't know why or to what extent that was going on. The other thing is they did have a whole very specific, very detailed catalog of saltwater fish that they kept for a host of things. They actually had cleaning fish for the hulls of ships that would be getting barnacles. And I don't know if that's like a parrotfish or what. I haven't gotten my hands on the original sources, and that's something that I would love to do. It's just I've stayed with fresh water mostly. But like you're saying, Misfits, They did have damsels, races. They even had dolphins and other like porpoises, dolphins, killer whales that they, I mean, all over Europe, all over the world. The Maori knew, the indigenous Australians, the Coast Salish, the Haida Gwaii people, the Inuits, the Yupik people. They all had relationships at different points in time with killer whales, orca whales, with porpoises, with other whales for hunts. In Australia, there was a bay where these whales would work together with a whaling boat in the 1790s, I want to say. Might have been a little later than that, but they would work with this whaling boat, and they would trap bigger whales in the bay and allow them to get harpooned. And the sailors would then cut the tongue out of the big whale, or the heart, or whatever tender pieces it was that the other, I guess, organ meat more so, and they would give that right back to the killer whales. So yeah. Now the other thing is, we know that the Romans, because of all their water, the water flowing through their cities, which was emulated by other people, but not only that, before the Romans, the Babylonians and the Assyrians and probably the Persians, who knows? We don't know who else. Probably like the Cambodian cultures as well. We know by 500 AD, and then later by like 1200, way up into Middle Age time, that the most sophisticated irrigation in the world was probably near Angkor Wat. That, or maybe Mexico City. Both places were essentially built in a swamp, in a lake, at the center of it, and then were turned into floating reeds, mats, temples, buildings, a city with 500,000 people living on water in the lake and relying on fish, and in Mexico, I mean, that means gutieds, that means, various cichlids, that means a few little tetras, and all sorts of stuff that they would have been catching from there. And you can bet that they would have done anything they could to attract food fishes that way. So I don't know, but in the Roman world, yet again, so they have reports of working with other animals, but they have very specific recipe kind of, or protocols for how to do, like how to make different kinds of salt, how to keep the aqueduct free of larvae and algae. So they actually would use catfish, and probably it looks like maybe like a European suckerfish of some sort. They could put those in the aqueducts and in the cisterns and things that held water. And they knew enough to know that those weren't going to contaminate the water source. They're going to eat the excess stuff. Well, they also knew that if it ran out, then they're going to have dead fish in their water system. So there's also information in there about, they knew how to cause algae blooms. They knew how to put shade cloths over things. They knew how to add salt to the system to kind of flush things out. They knew how to add lime or crushed limestone to the system. And yeah, Pompeii was another spot that they had. They had fish pens, but in Carthage, which became Roman controlled, they actually had they totally bombed the whole place, and by bombing, not gunpowder, but like they used stones and smashy things. They actually had a entire bay that they could cut off and that they could process fish in, that they took over. They took that technology from the Carthaginians. And the Carthaginians refused to give them it. And that was part of the contention, was the ones who wanted to work with them and not get all slaughtered, and the ones who said, never, you'll never take us alive. Hannibal will be remembered, martyr, so there was kind of a debate whether they should just raise it and salt the place and make nothing ever live there again, or whether they should take it over and use it as a trade hub. And kind of something in between happened. But the other interesting thing about the garum trade that we mentioned, about that ketchupy, vinegary, fermented thing, is that every little port city would have something unique, whether that's, oh, we've got anise, or we've got mint, or we've got whatever it is that we add to our garum. Then it became well known for, oh, we've got this different type of whatever. And they then, people as far flung as, Germany, France, the Netherlands, and up into the Wall of Hadrian in the UK. So basically Scotland. And then all the way over to Constantinople, Istanbul, whatever. And then all the way down to Egypt at one point, in the Middle East, all through Israel and Jordan and Canaan. You've got people saying, oh man, there's this garum that comes from this place called Spain. I don't know where that is, but they would pay really good money for these things. They would trade. I mean, that stuff, they were trading obviously with China along the Silk Road. And yet nobody had ever been to China. Well, there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, nobody went the full distance to China and back. There are a few exceptions, and there are a few Chinese explorers that came out on ships and made a big voyage around. But that's for another channel, another time. Yeah, I agree, Zen Ginger. So, the last thing I'm going to say, I wanted to talk about all these ancient cultures, and also about the problem with what is a pet, what is domesticated when it comes to fish. Like, how much more domesticated can you get than googly-eyed goldfish? And they don't count those as a domesticated animal. They've been warped to the point where sometimes they die because they're so warped for form over function, So to me, that seems silly. They've been line bred for 2,000 years. That is clearly domesticated in my mind, but it's not officially. So, but that book that I mentioned at the beginning, Guns, Germs, and Steel, is a good book, worth the read. Talks about, why the world developed the way it did, with some interesting takes on that. But let's just talk about, we'll wrap this episode up with also plugging, tomorrow we're going to ask Ivan if he knows if the indigenous people of South America, if they kept any fish in particular, or what their main food fish are. We know arapaima and stuff are, but he told me something amazing the other day, which is that most of the areas where he used to be able to access within a day or two of travel, those areas have been either, polluted or overpopulated now. And when he goes there, he doesn't even see the angelfish because they're using freshwater angelfish as food. Like, that's a big enough fish to them that they should catch it, fillet it, and eat it. And that's how bad the poverty is right now in Venezuela, unfortunately, too. So maybe he'll touch on some of that too. I don't know. But when we talk about domestic fish coming to Europe, coming to whitey, European people from Asia, we have first the carp or goldfish. They also seem to travel over land because the Persians end up with goldfish and carp, and it becomes a big tradition for them to have something gold on their New Year's, which is thousands of years old. They call this Nowruz. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but Nowruz is a Persian celebration of the New Year, and you get a goldfish to put at the dinner table. And they still do this. I still have two Persian friends, and they still go get goldfish and do this. And some of them have goldfish tanks, others just, I don't know, whatever. But it's a tradition nonetheless. And oh, and the other thing I was going to say is I've heard this from several people in Scotland and Ireland, and then maybe one or two in Britain too. But they still do Christmas carp or Christmas bass, which supposedly is a holdover from that ancient Roman thing. So if you are in the UK somewhere or Europe, anywhere, and you have heard of Christmas carp and know like what the deal is, how you're supposed to keep them alive, all that kind of stuff, I would love to hear about that. I agree, Dragon Lair. Brim are beautiful, and we eat them. Sunfish, bluegills, bass. I think they're all pretty. Rainbow trout, they're freaking gorgeous. Um, but I'm just saying, size-wise, that river used to have big fish, like, that had a lot of meat on the bone. And now they're getting down the food chain to smaller fish, like a 1 pound angelfish. That was my point more so than that they're beautiful. But that's a bummer too. Hit that like button, you guys. I appreciate it when you do that. It lets people know that I'm not a complete sham. Manes, tails, fins, and fur. What's going on? What about the horse being domesticated? Well, we talked about a bunch of animals being domesticated early on. We didn't really go deep into the horse. That happened in Central Asia, probably around 10,000 years ago to 6,000 years ago, somewhere in there. It's pretty arguable. And then it was really came into its own with the small ponies that were war ponies that were able to really be used in battle and for agricultural needs. So around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, their use. But before that, they were used in battle. They did make it all over Europe, Africa, South Asia too. But they were a little more limited, and it isn't till later, Middle Ages kind of period, and actually late Roman period, you get some horses that can run pretty quickly. They can't do it for very long. They still would use human runners, hence a marathon being a human run event and things. They actually would, humans used to run down in Native American society, teenagers would run down deer. So elk, deer, things like that, they would get 2 or 3 teenagers and they would have them in the woods and they'd have them sneak up on elk or deer, and then they'd chase them down and they'd dart back and forth. And yeah. Yeah, Dragon Lair, I agree that the Mongolians and I think the Cossacks, last I heard, the Mongolians, the Cossacks, the Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, all those places, the steppe, as they call it, the Asian steppe, that's who I've always heard domesticated the horse, but who made it into a war animal, the Mongols, really, and then who made it into a racing animal and stuff. I've heard more Arabs and Egyptians. I don't know how true all that is. That's just what I've come across. Somebody could be a horse expert, and I'd like to hear if you know something to the contrary. Zach, I'm glad you caught a live stream too. But so let's wrap it up with the start of our modern era, when I think for sure these fish are pets. So we have half beaks are now recognized as being probably 1,000 years old in Southeast Asia. Um, and they were used for betting, gambling, and solving like bets, like dice almost. They would use wrestling half-beaks to wrestle each other. Go figure. Bettas were also kept in captivity far earlier than we thought until recently. Now we're looking at their mitochondrial DNA, and we're realizing that they were kept in captivity a good 1,000 years ago. And there were scripts saying, don't let your fish fight. It causes alcoholism, it causes fights, it causes drunkenness. Basically, they would go gamble. And the Buddhist controlled regions of Southeast Asia, and then later on the Muslim controlled parts, both were very against that. The Buddhists for cruelty reasons, and the Muslims for religious, more Sharia law, I guess, reasons. They affiliated it with negative things. Then the other thing that was domesticated in my mind was the paradise fish. So they had paradise fish with the long tails and the brighter markings than a traditional wild one would have. And this was done probably 700 years ago to 1,000 years ago. And all the way up to the Korean Peninsula, over to Japan, and down to Vietnam, Thailand. Those fish can be found in China as being traded and being kept for good luck, being kept to handle mosquitoes. That's the other thing, is the Romans used little minnows to handle mosquitoes in their aqueducts and things too. So there are a lot of levels of aquaculture that went on that just get overlooked, and they're like, oh, that's not really a pet, or that's not an aquarium, or that's not a this or that. But to us, I mean, it looks a lot like a tub. If they have a book that's 30 pages on how to take care of one species that's just for eating mosquitoes, to me, that feels a lot like that's a domesticated pet, or a domesticated beast of burden almost at that point, if it's just there to eat flies and bugs. But all those critters then made their first real appearance in 1651, I believe it is. The first goldfish came to Europe via Portugal. Then in 1692, the first goldfish made it to France, another shipload from them. They also brought back a paradise fish that didn't make the cut, didn't survive right then. But by 1750 something, they were able to get paradise fish and bettas into Europe. Wasn't really until the early 1800s, though, that became more widespread. And by the 1820s or 30s, both in Europe and in America, the betta splendens probably were brought in. Cherry barbs were another one that were brought in. Rice fish were not brought in, but paradise fish, kissing fish, gouramis. There's an Indian fish too that made it. I'll have to pull up the old some of the old magazine articles that I have that are from their order guides from America in the 1880s, 1890s. And they're basically, it's what people used to use for toilet paper, but it's like the Sears and Roebuck catalog. Basically, it had beautiful woodcut images and prices and descriptions of everything they sold. And you could buy anything from a freaking house, like a you build it house, to pots and pans, to guns, to even in the 1920s, it still existed, And this is the store Sears before it became that. Hudson's Bay Company was another one. But there were these mail order companies, essentially, that you could send away for products. And Same thing went for fish. So they started showing fish in there. And then you started to see other really interesting fish in there. Guppies and live bears, smallies and swordtails were not long after all that. But I've done an episode on all of that in the US specifically. And we've even looked at some of the magazine listings and how much it cost. The equivalent of $2,000 to get an angelfish in 1915 to San Francisco. Pretty crazy. Where it was only $12 in New York, and it was only a penny in the Amazon, you know? So it's crazy how that, or for that matter, in Mexico City, you could get them in Spanish-speaking Mexico City, you could get them, there's ads for them being much, much cheaper because the heat, they had the heat. So yeah. Son of Quack. And now Sears has multiple stadiums. Moral of the story, start selling aquarium fish. You know, they used to sell Tommy guns too. You could buy fully automatic Tommy guns in the Sears magazine. But yeah, everyone before toilet paper was a thing, when you used leaves, people would use the Sears, like that's what they'd leave in the outhouse before indoor plumbing and stuff was big. So that was a nice other secondary use, or as kindling, you know, fire starter. That's about all I have to talk about today. I mean, only about 20,000 years of history and humanity and animals and beasts of burden. I hope you guys liked this one. I hope it was a little interesting. This wasn't one where I went and like totally went back and found the exact date and the exact name. It's just stuff I've read about so many times and I'm so passionate about that I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff. And sorry that I was forgetting my words there for a minute in the second, in the middle. That happens for me time to time. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you could hit that like button, I'd appreciate it greatly. And you know, thank you all for joining me. I hope you guys join me tomorrow with my or why do I always say Milo? With Ivan Mikolji, who has the incredible new book Fishes of the Orinoco River in the Wild. I mean, this 400-page beautiful book that he spent 20 years making. We're going to talk to him all about that. So if you have questions, let them rip. Look at all those quarries. Quarries at night. Just incredible photos. So in any case, tomorrow we'll be talking with him live around this same time, right during this same time. So yeah. All right, guys, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you so much to you members and to those of you who was it? It was Misfits Reptiles that did the super chat. Thank you so much, buddy. I really appreciate it. And also lurkers, thanks for lurking. Question askers, thanks for questioning. And Alyssa, thanks for Alyssa-ing. Anyways, let's see here. Mike, what did he say? Check my comment on live Xmas fish. Okay, cool. Thanks, Mick. I appreciate it. Yeah, sounds like you know something about it. Cool. So it still exists. It's not just a myth, maybe. Thank you, Rye. I appreciate it. Right? And I am gonna get out of here. But I hope you guys all have a great evening. Take care of your critters. Take care of your plants, your fishies, the people around you. But of course, take care of yourself. Because if you don't do that, you can't do all the other stuff. And I think if half of us took care of all of that, even half of the time, we'd have a world that is twice as good. So keep your heads up, keep smiling, give your fish some love, and give some thanks about the legacy that went into what we have today, all the things we have today, the history behind them, the detail behind them, and the trial and error and the luxury that it is to have running water or electricity or even be viewing this. We really do have an incredible world, and there's always something to learn and always something to be excited about. And I hope this channel is helping to inspire that. All right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow night around this time. It'll be 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 East Coast time, and we'll have Ivan on. So that'll be a really special guest. I'm really excited. Invite whoever you want. All right, guys, take care. Goodbye.